Yeah, so as Shane mentioned, it was a bit of a blast from the past when she contacted me recently. And I think it was because of some new activity that I had on LinkedIn with the Buchu Association and now the Southern African Botanical Products Association. I think it sparked within her this idea that, there is this other commercial side of what 1KSA is doing. I wanted to come to the whole presentation today because I wanted to try and get more of an idea of where the synergies lie, and I have to say I'm still struggling to see where that is, because industry associations, we tend to be groups of companies, and for companies it's always about the bottom line. So we don't tend to focus on research. It's interesting to us. We will use that research if it's valuable to us. But what we really focused on is quality. So we test for quality, we test for safety, so mostly to test that there isn't something that's horrible in there, or we test for efficacy. So then we want to know that there is something in there that people are interested in. So that's sort of our focus. We're not generally interested in taxonomy, It's great that that's happening, but for industry it's difficult for us to utilize that kind of information. So yeah, as Shane mentioned, so I'm here sort of with two hats on at the moment. I work for a company called Parceval, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll talk about sort of the new direction that we are going in terms of industry associations. And then if you have questions, please just put up your hand and ask as I go along. I can't answer very technical stuff about what Parceval does because I'm the project manager. I'm not the person doing the research anymore. But I can certainly, pass on those questions to the research team if there is more technical types of questions. Okay, so Parceval, we are a company, a herbal pharmaceutical, herbal medicines, complementary medicines, cosmetic ingredient company based in Wellington. We started out actually with a huge focus, a primary focus on a plant called Pelargonium pseudoides. We were part of the Schwabe group, so it's a German group of companies that one of their major medicinal products, one of the only South African indigenous plants that's really been developed into a medicine, a therapeutic. That's their product. But in 2008, we split from that group and we had to diversify. And over the last almost 20 years, that's what we've been doing, diversifying into lots of other different products and different South African species. We also do exotic species. We don't only cover indigenous species, so we do, I can't think of the name, chamomile, we do all sorts of other things, echinacea. There are other products that we do, but a large focus is on indigenous products. So obviously, access and benefit sharing was always a big thing for us, and we have been involved since the NEMBA and the BABS regulations were promulgated in South Africa, and we were one of the first companies to actually get a permit for our company, our group company in Germany, and for ourselves. We were one of the first permits to be issued. And all those other nice things, organic, we've got an organic farm, we practice biodynamic, very much into sustainable farming. And then we have a processing facility as well, which is registered with SAPRA. We've been a member of the Union for Ethical Biotrade since 2019. So yeah, we do jump through a lot of hoops, and it's very costly and very time consuming, which is, why you have to have people who are actually not operating in the factory and not doing the processing, but just doing admin all the time. So we have a pharmacist, we have quality control, quality assurance, just loads and loads of quality people who aren't involved in the production of products at all. All they do is like ticking the boxes and saying, yes, this is safe, this is efficacious, this is ticking all the right boxes. So right from the beginning, we were this very strong proponent of Nagoya Protocol, which is what the NEMBA and the BABS is trying to speak to, although it actually predates the Nagoya Protocol, which creates a lot of problems in South Africa with permitting. And we have been, encouraging our international users, our customers, as well as local companies to become compliant. But I don't know if many of you know, but up until this point, there's actually very little compliance in the indigenous plants arena for bioprospecting and access and benefit sharing. And that is because people just don't know what to do. They don't know if it applies to them. It hasn't been very strongly enforced. So there's just a lot of confusion around it. And so we try and actually not only encourage, but we also do some consulting work to help other companies and other industries to build their compliance. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff to do in our diversification. We can offer specialized plant cultivation. If there's something that's really difficult to grow, we will do the trials and do the cultivation. We will source raw materials for clients and set up the ethical supply chains for them. We do extract development and formulation for clients, crop development. We even will help people with designing GMP factories. We'll help them with the good agricultural collection processes and, as I mentioned, bioprospecting issues. So some of the things that we've done over the past 10 years, previously to that, between 2008 and about 2017, Parceval received no funding from any other source other than generating it itself. And then we started 10 years ago to raise grant funds. There's been a lot of interest from the Finnish and the German, Swiss funders in the biotrade industry locally. I think they see it as something, we have a huge biodiversity that can be built on. They see it as a way of creating jobs and improving the economy, something that's very unique to South Africa. And so we've raised funds for all sorts of projects, herbal tea projects, access and benefit sharing for the buchu industry, honeybush, a commercialization project there, marula looking at value-added products and novel essential oil species. We've done a lot of work and we travel all over Southern Africa to do that. So I'm going to maybe just skip through the first point there, the herbal tea brand, because we are a B2B company. We're not a B2C company. That was kind of a B2C company to try and get more B2B clients. So we don't really deal with brands. We are primarily plant extracts, ingredients, and things that go into other products. For instance, some of our clients, I didn't mention earlier, Clicks. We make a lot of products for Clicks, most of their complementary medicines we manufacture for them, all the Lintagon range for Nativa, and then about 40% of what we do goes overseas. I don't know if anyone's heard of Dr. Hauschka, the cosmetic brand. We do some of their ingredients, very high value, high labor intensive ingredients that they use. But yeah, so more of the sector development type of stuff we've done. We helped the Buchu Association form, first of all. So we brought the whole Buchu industry together in about 2019. We raised funding to get an industry-wide benefit sharing agreement with the SAN and the Khoisan. And then over the next sort of 5 years, because COVID happened in the meanwhile, we actually eventually got to the point where there is an industry-wide benefit sharing agreement. So that's only the second one in South Africa. The first one was Rooibos, and that's been going since 2019. And now the Buchu was just signed in 2024. So you can see it's not a fast process. We're getting there slowly. But yeah, there's a lot of resistance, and you really have to convince people that they need to do this. And then also more recently, we got involved with honeybush to some degree. We had an overseas client who was interested in developing an extract from honeybush. But of course, for them to get a permit, they needed some South African suppliers to have permits. And at the moment, the honeybush industry is only working on their industry-wide benefit sharing agreement. So we had to work with some of those suppliers to first get them compliant in terms of access and benefit sharing. So that means paying benefit shares to the TK holders. And then we could go the next step up and get our users overseas to have permits as well. And thinking just something, what I've heard today, just discussions that I've had with Sengen, one of the places where that genome sequencing could really be useful is on the honeybush, because it's very important for those users overseas that their material's pure and that it is going to always be the same species of honeybush that is that they're buying. And at the moment we take flower samples or plant samples and get them identified at a herbarium. And obviously that's a few plants that have been selected from tons of material that's been collected and harvested. So it would be so nice to have some sort of DNA fingerprint to say this is subtenata, or at least it's 90% subtenata, or whatever it is. So that's just some of the stuff that we've been involved in. You can see pictures. Also ongoing, because we work with the Buchu Association now, we are part of the Buchu Association. We've been developing promotional videos with them and also sustainable harvesting guidelines for Buchu, just as part of the sector development around Buchu. And as a member, we've been helping out with that kind of stuff. We also are, we've just finished actually delivering a short course to San and Khoi Khoi members, community members, on Buchu and cultivation and agricultural cultivation, etc., because that was part of the benefit sharing agreement. It's a non-monetary side, so it's not non-monetary as in it doesn't cost anything. It's just non-monetary to the TK holders, to the recipients. But that was what we agreed with the SAN and the Khoi San councils, that we would do this training as well. And this is now something that's also developing. I see you guys are also very much involved in training. And this is something that we're seeing as a role of associations and just the biotrade industry in general to start offering more in the way of training of people. And then we're also involved in aloe ferox, so specifically also developing their sustainable harvesting guidelines. And that's because we have a big aloe ferox client overseas who had some money to throw around, and they said, what can we do with this? And we said, well, there's this lovely biodiversity management plan that's been put in place by the government, but nothing's happened on this so far. No one's done anything. The resources are low. So why can't we actually help out with that and create these sustainable harvesting guidelines for them with some funding from overseas? So that's just some of the stuff we're involved with as Parceval. Now, the next step is the Southern African Botanical Products Association. So because of all these projects, we were involved in the grant funding, and we were in Marula, and we were Buchu, and we were here, and we were there. The whole focus of the funding sort of developed into, well, let's develop whole sectors. Let's not just support SMMEs, individual companies here and there. Let's try and make the sector as a whole, build the pie, make the pie bigger. And so there are some sectors that got actually funded to have sector development plans developed around them, and that was Buchu, Honeybush, Marula, Baobab, and then we also own essential oils, I think. And then we also came along in the second round with Scaletium and said, okay, well, rooibos is huge, it's very well resourced. Buchu also, probably the next biggest, I don't know exactly, but it's probably the next biggest, then Honeybush, and they're all coming along with their industry-wide agreements and with their associations. But what about all the other sort of smaller, sort of what we call orphan species that don't have a home? and they don't need an association because the tonnages are probably really, really small, especially compared to your big biotrade species, your big commercial species. So, so we founded this association in 2023. And it's kind of the perfect intersection. There was Parceval on its own, one little company, trying to do all the stuff, advocacy work and projects and sector development, and now we've got a vehicle to do all of that, and it's the Southern African Botanical Products Association, and we have members now that we can call on a board, and multiple members who can take on roles, and we can resource it with membership fees and all these kind of things. So it really helps, and we're wanting to represent a wide scope of people, so growers, processors, brand owners, anyone basically working with indigenous botanical products. And we're even thinking of now saying not even only indigenous, but just botanical products for health, wealth, not wealth, health, wellness, and beauty. Cannabis. Oh, cannabis is very well resourced, if you ask me. No, well, it could, because technically, if we don't focus on indigenous, we could look at cannabis as well. So currently we are sort of focused on Scaletium, but we intend to expand that out to lots of other species. I heard you guys talk about Sutherlandia earlier. I don't know, what else did I hear you speaking about? Pelargonium, yes, we'd love to bring Pelargonium in here. It doesn't need its own association. Devil's Claw, Harpagophytum, any Hoodia, you were talking about Hoodia, Hoodia could come in here because it doesn't need its own association. But there are people that have businesses built around it. So that list is kind of like aloe, yes, aloe definitely, yeah. And that list could just basically get huge and long and very complicated, yes.
Can genome sequencing not help the whole industry? Because if you have a genome sequence of an interesting species and you can mine for clusters of biosynthetic genes that are responsible for those products, that could help you with breeding to breed specific products, maybe have more products in a certain plant that's will have more on that of value.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not typically the way that the medicinal plants industry has worked, but that's not to say that it can't. And I know in Buchu that would certainly be something that could be looked at and something we would definitely consider, because obviously there are things in Buchu that you don't want at all, and there's other things that you would love to have more of. So yeah, if we could improve the material, that would be great. Scaletium, definitely. Scaletium is all over the place, like even two plants growing next to each other. Completely different alkaloid levels, completely different alkaloids. So yeah, if we could have some kind of like good clonal material that was always high alkaloid, that would be great. Cecilia?
Just on the plant breeding of indigenous crops, you have big problems with the conservationists because you're mixing the natural plant populations, especially when you cultivate. And we have Buchu is the genomic sequence. We just now have somebody to extract all the nice things we need.
Good.
So yeah, plant breeding can work. I was doing that on honeybush, and then I had all the guys now, and I'm contaminating all the populations and species, etc. So it is a thing that must be carefully handled, but yes, that is ultimately where we want to go with the indigenous stuff as well.
Yes, yes. Because the overseas international users and local users, they want consistency. They want to know, when I buy this, I'm always getting this. And that's really difficult with biologicals.
So I think, getting both the genome sequencing and the conservation into perspective, and also touching on the breeding, I think, being very particular about having a commercial space in which hybrids are housed, is often a good practice. But a genome is an excellent template to start, understanding the biochemical pathways, the genes that are involved, and ultimately you can even then synthesize those pathways in a lab without needing to have the plants grown. I think that would be an ultimate end goal, to have a perfect consistency and potency of certain chemicals that one wants to isolate.
Yeah, and there has been a move in that direction in the past, like for instance with buchu and with actually all indigenous medicinal plants, and I'm sure it's the same with crop plants as well. You have these booms and these busts. And then the price is up here, and then everyone's growing it, and everyone's harvesting it, and everyone's selling it, and then the price goes, and then they pull it out, burn it, do whatever, we don't care, feed it to the sheep. We're not doing buchu anymore. It's true, sheep love to eat buchu, actually. They really do. So definitely it would help with that, but what has happened is people want the natural ingredient. They don't want the synthetic one. So it is very, very doable. And we're actually working with a pharmaceutical company at the moment, which has developed a drug candidate from a resource which will remain unnamed. And they are looking at other routes of making the drug candidate, because if they launch and market this drug, which will be extraordinarily popular, they will need tons and tons and tons of this plant, which we know at this point we can't get enough from the wild, and nobody's cultivating it because it's relatively unknown. So we have been for the past 3 years desperately propagating and cultivating and just making sure that it is possible. Because if it goes big, then suddenly you need huge quantities. And that has its own effects on the environment. If you now have to have 500 hectares under indigenous plant, great, but it's still a monoculture. It's still a huge plantation. Pathogens, there's all sorts of things. So these are all the things that people do need to think about when they start to develop a product. Like having that synthetic pathway is also important, and that's where, again, the genome sequencing could come in useful, and I'm specifically thinking for that product. It could eventually be something that we want to look into. All right, so then I'm not going to go into the boring detail about the formation of our association. Needless to say, we've been very busy for the last 2 years doing all this stuff. And a lot of that has been hosting events, going to trade shows overseas, introducing ourselves, introducing South African biodiversity, trying to promote Scaletium, but not only Scaletium, trying to promote South Africa as a source of interesting, novel, exciting, new products for product development. And that is our board at the moment. We will be in place for the next year again. As you can see, we have lots of different things going on. So there's a regulatory and certification side looking at GRAS registration and novel foods, method development. We've got someone looking at research and quality control. We also need to think about sustainability. We need to think about transformation and inclusivity. These are our watchwords that are very important from the government. And then, of course, just the usual kind of roles of secretary, treasurer, chairperson, memberships, because we need to keep on bringing in new members to create the resource base to do all the things that we want to do. Right, so now WhatsApp has been up to, so we've been up to a lot. So obviously we're there as a membership-based organisation, so we're there to support our members. And supporting, we've got 30 members so far. Supporting them also means growing our membership and getting more people to come on board. But as I said, we haven't even really expanded into other sectors yet, and we've already got 30 members, so this could get quite big if we now open it up to a whole lot of other plant species as well. We haven't really quite got round to it yet, but we really want to have a code of conduct for our members, so they need to sign up to certain things when they join, criteria such as, good marketing practices, also, how you treat your staff, how you treat traditional knowledge holders, these kind of things. Just generally being an ethical company. And we also would eventually like to have a quality seal, which says if you are a member of SAPA, you've signed this code of conduct, you really subscribe to a certain high level of quality. So international companies can come to our members and know they're really getting like a high level of ethical business and good quality products. Obviously, part of that is also the whole compliance, so the NEMBA and TOPS, which is coming in or has come in. I'm confused about the whole thing. It came in and then it went out and then it came back in. So not quite sure what's happening there. Organic is obviously quite important for some of our users overseas, not all. It's important for things like teas and products that people consume, but less important for something where people, where you're putting it into a cosmetic product or something like that, then maybe organic's not so important. And then, so we've spoken a little bit about the GRAS status. I don't know if people know much about that. Self-affirmed GRAS just allows you to have a standard product that is accepted on the US market without any kind of FDA testing or anything. Only if somebody dies, then the FDA will come in and test it. But that's very American. Yeah, but I mean, that's what it basically comes to. You say, I've done the testing, we've done the testing, a panel of experts has looked at it, they've said it's okay, so, let this go on the market. And then, obviously, as an organization, we have a lot more clout to bring in more funds as well. So fundraising, getting investment into the biotrade sector and the biodiversity economy. Because I was saying to someone earlier, basically nowadays, we're not only expected as industry to not kill anybody, but we are also expected to do benefit sharing now for traditional knowledge holders, and what's coming in now is we have to be responsible for biodiversity management and conservation suddenly as well. So these are things that we need to think about, and they're big asks. Individual companies can't do that. They can't conserve a species. They can't, but as an association, we can work together as a collective and show what we are doing. And obviously a big part of it is the market. We've found with funding, there's lots of money thrown at sort of, consultants and people to find out more about the resource assessment and NDFs and all these funny things, but there's actually not anyone focused on, is there a market for this thing? And the government is putting loads of money into 25 key species that they think have a lot of bioeconomy potential, but then they're saying, let's grow 500 acres, or 500 hectares of this thing. And we're saying, but who's going to buy it? What are they buying? Like, if you're not focused on the market and growing that market, then you can grow, scaletium for 100 hectares, but you're not going to sell it. Scaletium. Wow. Don't get me started. Scaletium is very exciting. So traditionally it was chewed. They actually fermented it for 2 weeks and then they would chew it. And it's kind of euphoric, but it's not a hallucinogen. Although it is used, unfortunately, there is a recreational. Okay, well, there is a whole recreational sort of focus as well on that. And of course, you can play with the number of the alkaloids that are in there and go one way or the other. But for non-recreational use, let's put it that way, I think people are very interested for anxiety, depression, cognitive enhancement, focus. So it has this ability to keep you very focused, but sort of just remove you one step away from it so that you can be calm. But there is a need for a lot of more research. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, there's a lot of good stuff that's been done, but nothing, no actual solid clinical trials that have been done.
How is the traditional healer industry that, in my perspective, is actually a very big informal market industry, fit into something like this?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one. I'm going to say I don't know enough about it to have like a good solid opinion about this, but I think they're feeling a little bit left out because they're not seen as traditional knowledge holders, so they're not getting the benefits of the industry paying benefit sharing to them. But on the other hand, there's this whole thing about the bioeconomy strategy that's been developed, and that's all about communities and indigenous people and people utilizing our bioresources, but for economic benefit. But they're sort of being utilized as maybe the access providers and the people who can grow this bioeconomy, but then they're sort of being left out of the whole traditional knowledge. Like, it's not traditional knowledge if you're an individual. It's only traditional knowledge if you're a grouping of people. And the government has actually identified certain groupings at this point, and they will say, okay, you're interested in scaletium, you need to speak to the Sand Council, and that's it. You speak to the Sand Council, you don't speak to anybody else. Cecilia?
PSDI have a big thing on with the traditional healers. There's a group focusing on traditional healers. They are acknowledged as traditional holders, where it is an individual. Our biggest problem currently is, and it's the same with others, our by-trade things is, the traditional healer is normal one person, and his son or daughter, he will give it to one person. So they have the problem that, and that's what of our things, in South Africa, we can't put on a thing, it helps for diabetes if it is not through clinical trials and proven. So if we know some of our things are helping diabetes, high blood pressure, but it was only done on mice and things, so that is not human. So we still need to do it in humans, and that's where we don't have funds to do that. The problem with the traditional healers is the same. They can't sell their medicine unless it went through clinical trials, and that is where they say, but they treat the people now for hundreds of years. And okay, if somebody dies, then it is probably not from his medicine, but of other reasons the person would have actually died. So that is where the problem is, and I know they are part of SAFRA, they are recognized as medical healers. So there is from government side that, but again, like we have here is, these things falls in different government departments. So health is for the medical side.
Yeah.
But now we get the biodiversity and traditional knowledge, and research needs to be in that. So we do some research, DSI funds some research, so we can say if this person say this helps for headache. Researchers are doing research and say, yes, it has this compound, and we know this compound helps for headache. So yes, so we have that proofs, but not clinical trials. So that is where we have a problem. So health is on the one side, science is on the one side, and then we have Department of
Environment.
Forestry as well, and environment. So it is sometimes we all run in that, and that's where agriculture comes in, because now we want to cultivate. You see, and DTI must come in with the marketing.
Yeah.
So that is difficult to get all these government departments working together.
Yeah.
So there is, I agree, but there is somebody looking at the traditional healers, but they also run in the problems we run with our products, which.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they can sell them on the informal market, that's okay. But if they wanted to try and put something into, I want to say Clicks, but Clicks also doesn't only sell products with clinical trials. But yeah, it just becomes a lot more difficult. As soon as you want to say this cures something, or this actually, you want to make a claim, a medical claim, then it becomes a lot more difficult. And as Cecilia was saying, you have to deal with all these different departments. So just an example, it's not an indigenous plant, but we met someone the other day at the Organic and Natural, wants to develop camphor for camphor oil, has a market for it, local market, someone wanting to buy tons of camphor oil, wants to develop an outgrow market, has now been told by the Department of Agriculture that he has to have EIA, which is hugely expensive, environmental impact assessment, for each outgrower, which each time costs 40,000 Rand or something to have an EIA done. So it's completely stifling that business. It's seen as a potentially alien invasive species, and that's why they want this EIA. But yeah, so we have a lot of rules and we have a lot of regulations which are actually stifling business. And that's something that we also want to try and work on. So we don't work with DSI very much. We mostly work with the Department of Environment, but we know that the DSI has introduced this new IKS, Indigenous Knowledge Systems, and we don't know how that's going to play with the DFFE traditional knowledge. Now they're becoming sort of interchangeable. TK is IK and IK is TK, and yeah. At this point, we know environment deals with access and benefit sharing, and so they're the ones we deal with. But we don't know what it's going to look like in the future with the IKS Act as well.
I wanted to play the devil's advocate for a little bit, because we're talking about businesses that international or overseas companies want to bring to South Africa, right? Why would they want to work in a country where there's so many obstacles? Because it seems like other countries would have also their versions of whatever plants and molecules they're after. So how does this play in the bigger perspective?
Well, I'll just skip over that slide. That's just some of the things we've been events we've been attending. This is where we really want to try and focus. So we are saying to the government, you guys are stifling business. We are trying to bring these international users here. We're selling them a lovely story. Oh, honeybush. Yeah, honeybush tastes amazing and it looks amazing and it's got this wonderful story, and it's just, why don't you buy it, And then they come here and it's like, oh, well, you have to have a discovery phase permit if you want to do some research on that. And oh, if you want to commercialize it, you must apply for that permit now because you might only get it in 2 years' time. It's really just, it's not conducive to overseas companies coming on. So yeah, we are doing a whole bunch of stuff around speaking to the government as well about how can we make this easier. As an association, can we have an umbrella permit that just covers everything? Here's our list of species that we want to cover. If someone from overseas comes along and wants to work with that species, they don't have to have prior informed consent, they don't have to try and find out who's the traditional knowledge holder. We would hold the benefit sharing agreement, and then they would still need a permit, they'd still need the piece of paper that says, I have a permit to do this work, but they don't have to go through all that work. And the permit exists already, so they can just start working straight away. We're speaking to the government now about can we do that? How can we do that? And that might be possible because research is the benefit sharing that you do for research. Obviously, you're not making any money, you're not selling anything. So how can you share monetary benefits? You can only share non-monetary, and that is things like sharing your results, interacting with the communities, maybe some tech transfer training, those kind of things. So that's one of the things that we're talking to the government about. Also, more of these industry-wide agreements as well. So Rooibos, now, if you want to work with Rooibos, again, you find a compliant supplier locally, you have your little permit, but the benefit sharing is taken care of. You don't have to do anything additional. So we're really trying to direct the government in that direction. And they're quite amenable to that because it makes their lives easier. But they've got to bring the TK holders on board now as well to say, well, not every individual company is going to come to you. You can't negotiate. You don't get maybe a chance to go a little bit higher on one. It's just an industry-wide. But it's so much easier for a whole industry to manage this and for people overseas then to utilize those resources. And believe me, we've had international users who you just say you have to get a permit. They say, no, maybe not so interested in Rooibos after all. We'll just do something else. Yeah, lots.
Yeah. Or I'll just go somewhere else.
We've got lots of companies that have recently said that. And we're saying, this is as easy as it gets, guys. And they're like, you know what, too much bureaucracy, we'll go somewhere else, do something else. We won't focus on that right now.
Well, and I think you raise an interesting issue. I mean, you were speaking about industry being focused on the baseline, and it seems like the issue that we're running into is there are so many related silos, but that are unrelated in their communication. Because, we're sitting in a part of the world that has the highest floral diversity, but the highest extinction rates. We're sitting with cultural backgrounds of exclusion. We're sitting with businesses that are struggling to do startup funding because of all the bureaucracy.
Yep.
And you've got 5 government departments all having different issues. So how do you see a space where we can ethically navigate as a business or an industry, taking into account research and conservation and inclusion, but making it easier working with government to not allow a space for wrongful exploitation at some point?
I think that's part of where this all comes in now. This is why industry associations are forming. Rooibos has been a council for a long time now. Buchu's just formed an association. Honeybush Tea has an association. And it is to try and keep everything more simple. So there's a board of executive people with experience in business, who can do this work for the individual company. So they can make sure that the TOPS legislation is properly complied with. They can make sure that Dalrod is happy with everything that we're doing. They can make sure that the compliance is there. And I think that's the direction we're going in at the moment. But from our point of view, we don't want to see a proliferation of just like 1,000 industry associations, like an industry association for Hoodie, and there's like 2 members, We want to try and bring it all under one roof, and ultimately we'd actually like to see an umbrella organization that does certain things for all the organizations. Even Rooibos, Buchu, they sort of become sub members. Don't tell them that. They wouldn't be sub, of course. But there were certain core activities, like all this legislation, like all this regulatory, like the promotional stuff, that even industry associations can't manage because it's too much. Then they can focus on their core, which is research into the products, like what does this actually do? We will focus on the other stuff. So yeah, I think this is the way that it's going, but it's still very complicated because government doesn't speak to each other, and we're talking our silos within national government. There's provincial government as well that now you have to deal with. So really, if you wanted to do everything completely compliant and legal, you would need harvesting permits at the provincial level. You would need cultivation permits at the provincial level, but then you need a bioprospecting access and benefit sharing at the national level, and it just gets incredibly complicated. So this is just basically everything that you're asking about, and we're talking about here is the stuff that we are trying to bring under one umbrella and make things easier, cooperation with the other organizations. So we're having meetings in June with the South African Rooibos Council, with the Buchu Council, with the South African Honeybush Tea Association, bringing them all together and saying, how can we collaborate? How can we build on the stuff the issues that we share, and focus on the stuff that's important to us as an industry. But then the big thing now is the new NEMBA. I don't know how many of you reviewed the new NEMBA. So we've got our lovely old NEMBA, which is already very onerous, very cumbersome, already putting off international users. And now you have the new NEMBA, which is even more onerous and even more cumbersome and even less user-friendly. So we really are motivating to try and change this. It's probably not going to be very, very easy, and may not even be possible. But yeah, we just want to simplify this whole bureaucratic burden. We're speaking to people within academia as well, because we know that academics are also put off doing research on indigenous plants, because they have to have this prior informed consent, they have to have benefit sharing agreements in place, they have to have permits. This is on top of the ethical clearances and all the other stuff that they still need. And they don't even know if anything's going to come out of this. It's just research. I'm just interested in seeing if, Scaletium is a euphoric. And how can I make it more euphoric? Yeah, so it's just incredibly frustrating that, we can't self-regulate, that the government seems to think they can manage every aspect of this. They can manage biodiversity and conservation, and they can manage every little leaf of buchu that gets, transported out of the country. It's just not possible. We know our government is under-resourced and that it lacks enforcement ability. So why not let the industry self-regulate? And that's where industry associations can come in, because then we have our membership, we can check on them, we can audit them. We are collecting the information and the data and giving it to the government. Instead of them saying, oh, well, we have a permit with this person, a permit with that person, we're going to try and collate that into some sort of meaningful data about the whole industry, one company. We're going to extrapolate for the whole industry. It's impossible. But if you have an industry association, they can do that. And we can start to get a lot more of a better scientific basis for the things that we do. And again, that's where genome sequencing could come in as well, just thinking about quality, just checking, no adulteration, making sure that the material is what it's saying it is. I can see, I can't see exactly how it might work, but there's certainly lots of information that can be gathered from that and would be useful for government, but they can't do that. They're never going to have the capacity to do that. I think the bioprospecting access and benefit sharing department is 6 people trying to do permits for the whole country. The whole biotrade industry, 6 people. It's just impossible. So we don't need to go into huge detail here, but can we shorten this whole process of negotiating with TK holders? Can we make it easy, make it fast, make it standard so that people don't have to say, oh, I don't know, is it 5%, is it 2%, is it 10%, is it 10% of revenue, is it 10% of sales? What are we doing here? There's no precedent. We could set up a biodiversity conservation fund, which, as I said, one company can't do it, one industry association can't do it, but if now you bring the whole biotrade industry together, we can actually do something meaningful. So basically what it comes down to is incentivize compliance, as opposed to at the moment just putting people totally off. They're just saying, well, we don't even want to go there because it's too difficult. So I think at the end of the day, what we'd like to focus on is sustainability, is making sure that whatever we do, the things that Cecilia was talking about just now, when we do cultivate, that we cultivate properly, that we're not impacting the environment when we do that. And you can do that with self-regulation. And then more research as well. So at the moment, we can't really afford to do the kind of research we would like to do. But if we come together as a much bigger biotrade industry, then again, we might have funding for this. We might be able to become a contributor to 1KSA and cover all our wonderful species. And mine that data and have a better understanding of what's actually happening. Exactly. But yeah, at the moment we can't do that because it's so fragmented, and we're just trying to bring it all together so that we can have more clout and we can actually speak to government as a body of people that actually have some say. Yeah. So.
Thank you very much.
Cool. I never thought I'd be able to do it for so long.